Hi, my name is Michael McNally, and I'm presenting on concepts in sustainable transportation. So, how can local regulations shape the sustainability of transportation? Individual towns are limited in their capacity to replace or rebuild infrastructure. In the case of highways and most rail, the state takes ownership of major redevelopment. Local roads can be reshaped by a town, but the cost is extremely high. Therefore, this presentation will go through ways that towns can encourage better, more sustainable transportation that enhances quality of life through local regulations alone. There are three main approaches. Towns can modify their parking requirements, lowering the amount of parking that is required and moving it elsewhere. They can encourage usage of alternative modes by ensuring that any new development is conducive with non-car transit modes. And finally, towns can target development in places where transportation is less needed. The first thing a town can do is reduce or eliminate parking requirements. Cities such as Sacramento, California, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Columbus, Ohio have had success with this approach. On the right is drafted language from Ann Arbor's use table for parking, which literally crosses out the word minimum, replaces it with a maximum amount of parking for residential uses, with the maximum set to a single parking space in most instances. Developers are burdened by parking requirements that force them to convert large parts of a parcel into non-revenue generating asphalt. Lower requirements to implement parking may save them money and allow them to reallocate their budget towards more housing units or amenities that will increase the chance of a park project penciling out. More holistically, parking is unpleasant to see and is unsafe to walk in. Eliminating parking makes pedestrian activity more pleasant. Most communities in the US are dependent on some amount of car traffic, unfortunately. Completely eliminating parking will have net negative consequences in these places, reducing customers for local businesses and inconveniencing residents. In these cases, towns can still modify their zoning regulations to require that parking be located in locations where it will remain largely out of sight. The Vermont Zoning Guide Enabling Better Places identifies parking reductions and the placement of that parking behind buildings as a sustainable practice for new development, and uses Burlington, Vermont as an example of how that can be effective. Burlington, Vermont's Church Street, shown here in the image, relegates parking in its core downtown area to adjacent garages and side streets, and only allows through traffic at a few points. This leaves most of the length of Church Street entirely free of cars, which is clear in pictures of the street. This makes walking downtown in Burlington very low stress, quieter, and safer, while also enhancing the aesthetic appeal of the shopping district. Pedestrians get to traverse rows of buildings without having cars cut in front of them. The businesses face the street and provide better supervision of activities in public space, providing eyes on the street that promote positive behavior. At the same time, people who need cars can still use them to get to the area with only a slightly longer walk. Repositioning parking is a very practical solution for communities that costs little and gives developers flexibility in how they choose to hide their parking. Requiring that parking go in certain locations is low-hanging fruit for any town seeking to make transportation more sustainable. Outside of core areas such as city suburbs, transportation can be made more sustainable by integrating requirements for non-car transit modes to be included in new development. This may be as simple as requiring developments to connect to adjacent properties via footpaths. Larger developments that could use a bus line should include capacity for buses, for example, by providing a turnout for buses or appropriate shelters and signage for their passengers. Development in dead ends, such as cul-de-sacs, should always link up to adjacent properties, allowing people who are at the end of the dead end to go and do things they need to do without necessarily having to hop in the car and drive a long distance. Developments adjacent to existing bike and pedestrian infrastructure should be required to tie into that infrastructure, extending the local network of alternative modes of transit and making getting out of the car and getting around still practical. Towns can also use zoning regulations to encourage development in places that will require fewer transit trips. Building new residential housing near existing commercial spaces will mean that residents won't need to get in the car to go buy things. Any combination of uses can reduce trips. Building residential or new commercial properties near existing services such as schools or hospitals allows people who need those services to get more done while in the area, further reducing car trips. This fits with the general need to densify our communities and avoid sprawl. Permitting the creation of mixed-use development in a community is one way zoning regulations can promote this behavior. However, planners need to be cautious here. The commercial real estate market is experiencing serious economic headwinds. At the recent Southern New England Planning Conference, a panel of developers discussed the challenges of financing mixed-use development, with one developer saying that commercial space in a new residential development is almost always destined to be a place for the apartment to store snowblowers and lawnmowers in the future, as demand for large commercial space is at a low point. It therefore may be safer to target future residential development near existing commercial uses, rather than build commercial space that may be unwanted. The image on this slide is one concept for the redevelopment of Hadley, Massachusetts Hampshire Mall, created by a UMass undergraduate class. With the mall in decline, but the surrounding area remaining a hub of commercial activity, adding housing on the site of the current mall, which is is increasing in vacancy, would be a pro-sustainability act by the town. Residents in the new development could access multiple grocery stores and other shops in the area, while also having access to a local bus transit and the bike path. This kind of redevelopment could be a boon to the area, but the concept plans also identify some issues that may need to be dealt with. Should they reuse the existing mall parking lots, or replace some of that space with green space or other uses, compatible with some of the parking changes that we've seen in previous slides? If apartments are built, is Hadley's busy car-centric Route 9 corridor a safe place for those residents to walk around? Additional improvements may need to be made for pedestrian safety. If these concerns are addressed, density and mixed use can positively advance the sustainability of transportation in town by reducing the need for multiple trips, connecting people to existing infrastructure such as public transit and sidewalk and biking networks. These two approved housing projects locally here in Western Mass exhibit development that can promote sustainable transportation. The first on the left is a 71-unit apartment complex on the site of a former church near the center of Northampton's downtown. This is a concept drawing. Will go between Elm and Main Streets in Northampton. The project is close to a major bus stop and within a block of the bike path. It also has easy access to downtown shopping and services. Second is a project proposed on Route 9 near the Hampshire Mall, which is a reuse of an existing hotel, the O'Connell Lodge. The project has walking access to Walmart and 2 grocery stores, sits along an existing bus route, and is close to the bike path. Again, this kind of project will encourage residents to make use of alternative, non-single occupancy modes of transit, without requiring radical reconstruction of existing infrastructure or development of new networks. And this is done largely through the exercise of local regulations, which permit this kind of development. However, it should be noted that the Hadley project in particular required an immense amount of back and forth intervention by the state on affordable housing grounds to eventually get the project through. The vision of the Hampshire Mall project, therefore, is likely far off, but these smaller projects around the periphery can still have a positive impact on sustainability. Towns are not limited to just zoning and subdivision regulation for shaping their communities. Congestion pricing is a city ordinance that can shape the intensity of transportation activity in a community and nudge it towards more sustainable uses. Congestion pricing entails charging tolls to all traffic that enters a designated area in a city or town. This has been implemented most prominently in London and more recently in New York. This program is capable of generating large amounts of revenue while noticeably reducing the level of traffic of cars. Drivers have to consider their desire for the convenience of driving against the added cost of the congestion pricing. Many drivers will optimize towards using public transit or walking or biking. If they normally commute by car, they may consider working remotely at least some of the time, or set up a carpool with coworkers, sharing the cost of the congestion pricing. All of these choices make transportation more sustainable, reducing traffic, noise, and pollution, while increasing pedestrian safety in the impacted areas and generating revenue. This revenue can then be spent on enhancing transit in the city further. All these changes will result in better quality of life for a city that implements this policy. The map shown is a piece of New York City congestion map, which highlights where tolls are charged. Drivers coming into the city are told while inbound on select routes. They can avoid tolls by taking certain roads, but will be tolled if they continue into designated congestion relief zones, mostly farther uptown. So in conclusion, zoning and subdivision regulations can shape transit patterns without building new infrastructure. By not building new infrastructure, these regulation adjustments are low cost and adaptable. It does not take a ton of money to then change regulation if you find it's not working, though it may take time. City ordinances can supplement these planning policies. Things like congestion pricing are not zoning or subdivision regulations themselves, but they can promote transportation sustainability. And finally, planners should be forward-thinking about development, about use, and its impact on transportation sustainability. Try and build things where the transit already exists, that requires people to not use their cars, that keeps them off the roads and maybe on footpaths and things like that. By doing this, planners can promote transit sustainability in their towns. These are my image sources, and this is my bibliography. Thank you so much.